So I'm very, very happy to see you all joining us today. This is very exciting. Our event today is titled Living in and Leaving Afghanistan, Women's Struggle for Survival. And joining me, Nazanin Sadid, who is a journalist in Kabul, Brishkay Ahmed, who is a filmmaker, director, producer in Toronto. She is Afghan Canadian. And Dr. Kerstin Tomiak, who is a former spokesperson of NATO in Afghanistan. My name is Talnitan. I am the head of the Sophie Davis Forum, who is part of the Leonard Davis Institution at Hebrew University. The Sophie Davis Forum focuses on gender, conflict, and peace. And what we usually do is we get involved with work within the IR department at Hebrew University, also do all kind of projects with other departments and units at Hebrew University in relation to gender and conflict, of course. And we also collaborate with scholars from different universities in Israel and all over the world around this topic, and have various projects together with civil society. Part of our mandate is in relation to the UN Resolution 1325 that speaks about the need to give for the nations to pay close attention to girls and women's greater vulnerability in situations of conflict, to the need to make space for them where decisions are being made in relation to governments and peace treatments and other important cabinets, like we had recently with the Corona cabinet. So in order to prevent women's vulnerability and encourage greater equality, it's important for women to have greater representation. And the third thing is talking about basically gender mainstreaming of bringing ideas that emphasize gender equality into ongoing conversations about leadership and about organizing, state building, and so on. The topic of the crisis in Afghanistan is naturally very close to what we do. And this is why we felt that it's very important for us to take part of this, or maybe even lead the conversation on this. It's kind of obvious how we are involved in relation to vulnerability of women and girls in relation to this specific crisis. But I think more important is to emphasize that in the situation in Afghanistan, what women lack more than all maybe is representation. And I talk both about representation within Afghanistan and outside of Afghanistan, because the situation in Afghanistan, especially with the Taliban now controlling the state, is that they are not part of any process of decision making. But also outside of the country, most of what we see is a conversation about Afghan women and hardly ever conversations with or by Afghan women. And I think that this is mainly what we want to do in this new collaboration that we are having. This event will be the first of several events speaking about the crisis from women and gendered point of view. And in this specific event, we want to hear women talk about the process of leaving and also what is left behind, emphasizing that living here is a must for some people. And there is a lot that they are leaving behind in order to survive. It's not things that they want to forsake. They want to continue being Afghan even when they go to France or Italy. And they feel that their life and the way that they want to be in the world has not changed. You just want to keep on being in the world, which feels that right now is not necessarily possible in Kabul or in other parts of Afghanistan. But as I said, the point here is not for me to explain what others feeling, and I would like to open the stage, first of all, to Nazanin Sadid, that, as I said, is a journalist in Kabul. She used to be a journalist for the Women Network, Zen TV, and she's here today with us. Nazanin? Yes? No? Okay. So, as I see that maybe she was not able to connect yet. Brishkay Ahmed, who's, as I said, a filmmaker, Afghan-Canadian filmmaker, will be able to start maybe this conversation and talk a little bit about her place as Afghan-Canadian within the current situation, and about how the past 2 weeks have unfolded. Brishkay?
Hi, Tal. Hi, everyone. I can hear you, but I think my video also needs to be unmuted. It's
okay.
The host needs to turn on my video.
Can you do this for us?
And that might also be.
Yes, this option is open right now. No,
okay.
Nazanin, she's not logged in. She still has. We don't see her.
Okay, I'm gonna go off and try to figure out how to help her go on. So thank you for joining us.
Sure. No problem. I'm happy to be here. And just on a note, I really want to thank you for acknowledging the fact that too much conversation has been about Afghan women and not with Afghan women. And if there was more conversations during the past 2 years during the peace talks with Afghan women, I doubt we would be in the predicament that we are today. So thank you for acknowledging that. Yeah, so Nazanin is a good friend of mine, and I really, really hope that she can join us soon. She is, as Tal said, a journalist with Zen TV, used to be with Zen TV, and she's actually in the sort of space and time where she herself is trying to get out of Afghanistan. So it's very complicated in the moment, getting women out, and as Afghan women outside trying to assist other women to get out. It's also difficult because we have to pick and choose. And it's not just Afghan women that are getting emails, phone calls, messages from people who are asking for help. So it's tough for everyone who has to make select people in this time, because if you try to help everybody, you will end up helping nobody. That's just sort of the way things are. So I have been very strategic and frank with people when they've reached out to me, and I have focused on the journalists who I filmed for the past 2 years in Afghanistan, and they are the focus. Of those 6, 5 are out, and Nazanin is the last one. She's left. So it's not easy, but for the women who have left, the whole process has been very difficult and strange, because some of them have arrived in, say, for instance, in Qatar, in Emirates, in Sweden, in France, and they are given different information. So some of them are arriving on 180-day visas. Some of them are arriving on 90-day visas. Some of them are being asked to send documents to file a refugee claim case in detention centers. So not all women, or Afghan women or Afghan in generals, who are leaving are having the same experiences or the same opportunities. There's a lot of uncertainty right now for a lot of, a lot of women, and of the 5 women that I know, 3 are not sure if they can even remain in the country that is bringing them in, because, like I said, they're temporary. There are restrictions on how much time they have. So 90 days or 180 days in this kind of a chaos and circumstance is very short. So, so we're not really sure what's going to happen. And for someone like Nazanin, who's waiting to get on a list to get to a 3rd country before coming to North America or Canada, for instance, we don't know what's going to happen either. So it's a lot of chaos. Yeah. Anything, did you want me to share anything else, Tal?
Yes. You probably cannot see me again. Yeah, you see me. So I was hoping that you'll be able to talk a little bit about maybe your work in Afghanistan in the past 2 years around the film, and what you've learned about what happened in the country in the recent few years, and maybe then you can talk about how it felt like being in the diaspora, experiencing things from afar. As an Israeli who lived in Vancouver, Canada for 10 years, I know that it can be very complicated to experience such things. So
I think I'll start quickly with giving a little bit of insight on what makes life complicated for Afghans who are outside Afghanistan, and even Afghans inside Afghanistan. Because of the decades and years of different regime changes and conflict, there's a certain amount of mistrust between Afghans initially when we meet one another in the outside. There's a lot of identities that are attached with regime and power and control. You're a Pashtun, you're a Hazara, you're, Tajik. So that can make communication between us Afghans a little bit difficult at times. And it's something that you can only learn truly if you immerse yourself with lots of different Afghan people. Otherwise, we can get sort of isolated within our own ethnic sort of groups and cultures. So for me, I've learned about Afghanistan over the past 10 years. Really, I've gotten to know my own country in the past 10 years because I've had the opportunity of returning back and forth many times while filming. And because I was filming and I was directing a TV series in Afghanistan, and then I was working in documentary, and my last project was working inside a radio television Afghanistan, the national broadcaster, I really, over the past 10 years, I've had the, beautiful opportunity to interact and meet Afghans from, Hazara Afghans, Turkmenistan, Tajik, Pashtun, and I've gotten to know us a little bit better. I've gotten to know why we are this country that is in a bit of chaos. So through the work that I've done, I've gotten to know my Afghanistan, which I am grateful for, but I'm also at the same time really sad because I feel like just as I've really gotten to know my country, it is now falling apart again. And so this is what Afghans go through. We have to constantly relearn about our own country, get to know ourselves again and again, over and over. And it's a painful cycle. So the past 2 years, 2.5, 3 years ago, I started filming on TV, the Women's News Network. And I think that's my video back on. So I started filming a documentary inside Zan TV, the Women's News Network in Afghanistan. And the reason why I wanted to film that is because I knew that the peace talks were sort of going to start soon. And I was concerned as to what's going to happen. How would a women's news channel survive if the Taliban came in? No matter what type of a brand this Taliban might have, how would that be possible? Because until 2-3 years ago, there was quite a bit of progress for Afghan women in terms of their participation in society. And when I speak about Afghan women, I do mean the ones in Kabul or Mazar Sharif or Herat, big cities. Because in all honesty, there are certain regions of Afghanistan where life has not changed for Afghan women. Life is as it was during the late 90s of the Taliban. And that's kind of how it's been for hundreds of years. They're small. So that itself is a complex issue. But in terms of the city, the capital, yes, life had changed a lot. We, there was the women that I was filming were all around between 20 and 25 years old. So very young, very connected to the global world through the digital technology. And, entering and exiting government offices, sitting side by side with male editors, the filming process, the production process for a journalist, getting the news out, it's very intimate. You're in tight, confined spaces. And so when I saw that, it both surprised me, but at the same time, it also terrified me because I was like, well, this way of working, this way of being would not be acceptable by any Taliban group, no matter how much they rebrand themselves as we are more liberal. It just wouldn't. Especially because already when I was there, I was witnessing, men on the street harass them, families playing sort of boss on whether or not they could come to work on a day or would not come to work on a day. Their dress code was being sort of monitored by different people, like the fruit vendor would have something to say about what, one of women was wearing, and their father would. So in many ways, that's kind of the way Afghan women are. They're sort of policed by men in general who think that they are their fathers in any source. So it was, a strange world to see because I kind of understood where they were heading. And then I found out they also knew where they were heading. They were very, very concerned about the Taliban peace talks. And it was heartbreaking to see that they were not able to participate. In fact, 96%, more than that, 98% probably of Afghan women were not able to participate in the peace talks. So what they were doing was they were interviewing people who knew someone who was in the peace talks, or they interviewed Fawzia Kufi, who was one of the women of the 4 that attended the peace talks. They interviewed her about it. And they were bringing in guests regularly to talk about the peace talks and the Taliban. And this conversation was happening inside the small women's news network, which, was barely functioning with very little, support in terms of financial support and things like that. And this conversation was happening also in other newsrooms everywhere in Afghanistan. But it was also disheartening to see that Afghan people had very, very limited role in participating in the peace talks, and women had an even smaller role. When it would just be common sense that who would be most whose life would change the most under a Taliban rule. Again, it doesn't matter what kind of a Taliban, whose life would change the most. It would be women and girls. So the women that I met inside the small news station were speaking out about it all the time. But for some reason, in the international community, their voice was not being amplified at all. There was a lot of talk, as I've mentioned, we chatted about this, a lot of talk about the Taliban, the United States, the peace talks, very little about real, conversations about where are the women in this table? What is going on with them? Why is the government that is representing the women in Afghanistan, why are they not part of the talks? And these kinds of things was missing. But over the 3 years that I was filming, I saw a team of about 20 young Afghan women and about 5 or 6 men shrink down to 6 by the 2019 Afghan presidential elections. Like, people just kept on leaving. People who knew that life was going to change a lot left in the early sort of 2018, 2019, and by end of 2020, when the pandemic hit, there was just a very, very small staff. Yeah. And beyond that, so now we have this predicament where in the past 24 hours or 48 hours, we have seen like an immediate shrinkage of women on TV, barely, even on radio. So, everything that the women suspected and expected is happening. They're not sort of being, it is happening exactly what they expected, which is they are being silenced. And so I just hope that in the international community, we can amplify Afghan women's voices and make sure that people, hear them and people respect them enough to know that they know about Afghanistan. They've lived there. And especially to like allow these female journalists like Nazanin and others to actually report on Afghanistan themselves. That's what I would like to sort of see, because that's the one thing that didn't happen during the peace talks. Yeah. And beyond all of that, I'm trying to remember, Tal, what else you told me to mention. I think you mentioned. Did you mention something else, Tal? I think you said to talk about the work.
Yeah, I thought talking about the work, but also talking about the current transition and how did you feel being away, but Afghan in a way? So how does it feel to see all of this happening, and if you were able to do things, what were you able to do in order to help?
Yeah. It's actually, to be honest, it's infuriating. Simply, again, because having spent so much time in Afghanistan the past few years with women and knowing how much they spoke out against the handover of the power to the Taliban, and having the United States sign an agreement with the Taliban and them arriving, it's infuriating. And it's the chaos around which it has unfolded is disheartening. And like I said in the beginning, I've been strategic. It's not a good choice. I wish I was not strategic. I wish I did not have to be like this. But I sat down with a list and I said, this is my focus. This is my goal. And all Afghans who are outside and even non-Afghans have had to make this decision, because everything started unfolding so quickly and there's time differences. So we've had to make choices of who we're going to, number one, write letters for. right? Number one, send emails, make phone calls, constantly nudge politicians, embassies, journalism organizations, arts organizations. And I cannot speak for everybody, but I can say that for me, my strategy has been about bringing to the attention the same names, so that somewhere along the line, their names come up often enough, that somebody will say, okay, this must be a priority, right? Now, since yesterday, which it has been a crazy 24 hours, because just 24 hours ago, the United States said, that's it, we're done, no more evacuation. And just right now, I think a few hours ago, the Qatari Airways has landed in Kabul with a team that is supposed to, for now, work with the Taliban to facilitate ongoing evacuations and facilitate humanitarian aid coming in. So there will be, supposedly, a certain group of people who will still be able to exit, and a certain amount of aid that will be allowed to enter. So again, it comes back to that, who's on that list, right? So who's on that evacuation list? So for somebody like Nazanin, and I have her permission to share this, for instance, she's right up there on that list. She was on that group that was supposed to get on the next flight to Canada, right? That's who she was, right there. And then it stopped. So, I'm hoping that in the small window that's opening up, where a few people who are on some of these lists are going to be able to leave while the aid is arriving, I'm hoping that someone like Nazanin, gets on that flight. That's really what I'm hoping. Because I know, and I hope she can join us. I hope she connects on, because I know that life will be bearable for some Afghans and for some Afghan women, but it will not be bearable for a woman like Nazanin. It will not. This is not who she's made for. She's grown up in the digital age. She's grown up connected to the global community. She cares about the world. She can't help but analyze, criticize, question. She just can't help it. That's just who she is. So a girl like that will not be able to function, will not be allowed to function in a totalitarian state. Yeah. So is she able to join us, Tal?
Yes. So Nazanin
is
here, and we're very, very welcome that she was very, very happy that she was able to join us. Nazanin, it'll be wonderful if you can tell us a little bit about yourself and your work. Brishkay has already talked a little bit about Zen TV, but maybe I think it's worthwhile to talk about it, and I think maybe even talk about how you became a journalist and why you became a journalist. I think for many of us who grew up in Israel, it's kind of a fantastic thought that Afghan women can go to school and become journalists.
Yeah. First of all, hello and good time to each panel members. This is Nazanin Sadiq, journalist from Afghanistan. I have graduated from journalism faculty of Kabul University, and I have worked for 3 years in different medias, and I have worked as a news reporter, and at the same time a camera woman and video editor and the Woman News Network, which most of my reports are about Afghan women, period. Why I became journalist, or I have choose to be a journalist. It was not easy in Afghan society. Even my family didn't want me to be a journalist, but it was my choice. It was my hope. It was my life, and I could able to reach to my goal. And thanks, Tal, because of giving me this opportunity to talk about Afghanistan and current situation. I have to say that still we are shocking about what's going on in Afghanistan and about taking power by Taliban. The escape of our president, Ashraf Ghani, was the worst damage on psyche of people and 20 years structure of the society and the system. And we fought 20 years for getting our freedom. We fought for getting our human rights. We fought for women's rights, and we had thousands martyrs in this long war. Thousands mothers have lost their children because of having a free homeland. I'm sorry. Thousands children have lost their father because of having a good future, and 1,000 families have lost their members in this war against Taliban. But this is really annoying feelings when we know and we see that we went back in that point, which 20 years ago we was in this point. Today, Afghanistan is the only country on the ground which here is no any government, here is no law, here is no security, here is no value for human lives. Here is no value for human rights. Here is no equality, no economic, and even here is no specific way for people to continue their life. When Taliban arrived to Kabul, a psychological bomb exploded among all people, and there was a lot of anarchy around all city. People had been closed their shop, people left their jobs, the gates of the schools and the university had been closed, the parents come to behind of the doors of school and was looking for their children, and a crazy situation on that day was in Kabul. But there was still hope in our heads by being of American military and being of the president in Kabul before escape of president. I talk about those moments. And in this last 16 days, people of Afghanistan, special people in Kabul, was faced with a really crazy situation. The doors of the bank was closed. All the banks had stopped their activities, and most of the people even didn't have much money to prepare their daily needs. And it's only about 3 days, which in all Kabul we have one active bank, and there are hundreds of people behind the gates of that bank to get at least a few percent of their money. And from other side, all the public service centers have suspended their activities, and people are in trouble everywhere, especially Afghan women. I think Afghan women are always at the worst point of war or peace in Afghanistan. The life structure of Afghan women have been changed since the Taliban came to Kabul, like deleting their photos from social media, staying at home, and yeah, changing their coverage, stopping their social activities, and etc. So we don't know we are going on our future, but still Afghan women don't want to give up. You know, after fall of Kabul and the next day, two female journalists and appeared on a screen of Kabul News without changing their coverage. And after that, 5 other female journalists resumed to their job and Tulu TV, and they took debate with the Taliban, and 2 female journalists by the names of Zahra Amiri and Hasibat Akwal went around the city among the Taliban, and they prepared their reports. But from other side, Taliban didn't allow Shabnam Dawran to return to her duty. Shabnam Dawran published a video on social media and has said that by having a contract and by having an ID card, when she wanted to go inside of national TV of Afghanistan, Taliban told her that after this, woman don't have any permission to come to work in the media. And from other side, Taliban say that all female employees should be in their home without female doctors. For now, they only allow female doctor to return to her to their duty. And we don't know. Nothing is clear in here. You know, 3 days ago, Taliban announced in Kandahar province that the voice of women and music should not be broadcast on TV or radio there. Although Zabiullah Mujahid, the spokesman of Taliban, several times have said that the woman can be involved in every section of the society, but under the law of Islam. But Taliban still doesn't have a specific policy for women. And all the people considering in social media that all the policy of Taliban toward people, special toward women, are just like a slogan because of getting trust of international society and making of their government. And people why want to leave Afghanistan, or why people left Afghanistan in a worse situation. You know, because they don't trust on Taliban. All the Taliban have announced amnesty for all people, and a general amnesty. They have announced a general amnesty against all people, against journalists, against the government employee. But from other side, according to the daily news of international medias, they have killed one family member of a journalist of Deutsche Welle. And from other side, they kidnapped 200 activists and journalists from near of Kabul airport. and Taliban didn't let them to go out of the country. And here are some more violence of Taliban directly and indirectly against people, like whipping of women because of their coverage, and in Kabul and in other province, as the videos or picture published in Facebook, and whipping of a woman because of riding in her husband, sister's husband's motorcycle, and beating of 5 journalists in Nangarhar province, beating of people. Even I heard from my friend that Taliban, when they walk around the city and there are a checkpoint of Taliban, when they face with Taliban check their mobile. If in their mobile was or be music, they will punish that. Why you listening to music? These are all violence of Taliban, and also they have killed 5% because of defending of our national flag in Nangarhar. And these are all violence against people. You know, I think these are the main reason of leaving of people from country, because they cannot trust on Taliban or they cannot forgive Taliban. 2 nights ago, when American military has left Afghanistan on 12 o'clock of night, Taliban did arrival shots. We all thought that maybe some fight or some attacks again, or maybe Daesh attacked on us. But when we looked to Facebook, we got that it's all because of celebration. They celebrate their dependence, and you know, all the night was like a very, I cannot say a bad dream, like a bad dream for all Afghan people in Kabul. So what should I say?
What should you say? Maybe you can rest for a minute. Maybe Brishkay or Kerstin, would you like to maybe think together with us? How did this happen? Brishkay already said in the beginning that if women were a little bit more involved in the conversations earlier in the past 2 years, when the US had peace conversations with the Taliban with no Afghans and no women, maybe we can talk about how the situation deteriorates to where we're at right now. Kerstin, you're muted.
You can unmute yourself now, Christian.
Okay. So much for silencing voices. Just saying. So I would like to, well, I probably should start with at least partly saying who I am. So my name is Kerstin Tomiak. I'm a former Leona Davis Fellow. This is how Tala and I know each other. And for this event, so I'm usually an academic for this event, I kind of did not feel it appropriate to basically say in this presentation, I am going to, and my argument is, and more research is needed. So I decided not to do that, but to just give an account of what has happened in the last 2 weeks. I have been working as a journalism instructor, field media team leader with the International Security Assist Force, with the NATO-led ISAF from 2006 to 2011 in Afghanistan, first in Kunduz, then in Kabul, with constant travelings to the different provinces, but mainly the north, so north and the west, and a little bit south, so basically through trade. And I worked then as the public affairs officer and spokesperson for the senior civilian representative of NATO, the NATO ambassador, and the leader of the intervention, the civilian leadership part of the Resolute Support Mission 2017 to 2018. That was directly before I came to Israel to study, to do my postdoctoral fellowship at the Leona Davis Institute. I would like to grab up an idea that if there would have been women involved in the peace talks, we would not be in that mess. And to be honest with you, I highly doubt that. The fact that not because women couldn't have contributed to that, and they definitely should have contributed to that, but not even the elected, I say that in quotation marks, elected government of Afghanistan was allowed to the peace talks. There's no way to include women in that peace talks, the way the peace talks, and I say also peace talks in quotation marks, the way the peace talks were set up by the United States with the Taliban. It was an exclusionary process, but it literally excluded the whole country. If for some reason it would have been pushed to include the voices of women there, I doubt very much that the Taliban would have allowed that. Again, it's even that they allowed the government of Ashraf Ghani to be there, and the Americans let them. So the situation might have been different, but I don't see how the situation could have pushed into that direction to include women's voices. It was never a question. The whole question of the so-called peace talks was for the United States a mission. However, just ended. And that is what happened. And that brought us to this incredibly volatile and terrible 2 weeks which we have had now since the fall of Kabul. But you have been saying before about choosing people you help at the same problem, or I had the same situation. From that moment on, when Kabul fell, my phone has been beeping and calling and ringing literally every minute with people wanting help, trying to get out. And you have to choose. And at one point, maybe different because I wasn't as focused than you are, Brishkay, I didn't choose anymore. I just took those requests as they came, because what we were looking at was actually two eyes of the needle people had to pass. One was being eligible and coming on a list. And actually from where I stand, that was the easy part. Compared, that was the easy part. When you were on a list, you had to make it on the airport. And that was the death trap, not because of the suicide attacker. It was a death trap before, because it's not that people go there in a calm, in a relatively easy process, in a good manner. You had to go through, you had to push with family, with children, with wives, through a crowd of people at the Abbey Gate or at the Baron Gate, both terrible. And they were not open constantly. They were actually just randomly, there were soldiers coming there and took you in. So there was the eye of the needle 3. You might have made it to the start of the queue and stand in front of the gate at the airport, but then there is no guarantee that people let you in. I have people who managed to get out. They were on a list, and they had the good luck that there was a soldier who said, okay, you and you come in. And then they checked if they were eligible, and they made it in the airport, and then they waited for a flight, and then they made it out. I have other people who are on lists, and they couldn't make it onto the airport. And that was the huge chaos we were seeing there, and the huge trouble we had basically to work with. I have people on lists now, but if they will come out is highly doubtful. We hope for it, and we still push. And I just yelled today at people in the defense ministry in Germany for quite some time, and that helped. My yelling helped, because they're still on a list, which means if they ever make it to a border or to the airport, and if and when there will be a flight, they might be on it. But it's luck. It's really sheer luck. So the feeling overall, as a person being outside of the country, trying to help people, the feeling I have is a feeling of failure, is a feeling of shame, and a feeling that I abandoned people with whom I worked for years, who made my work possible, who were the kindest, loveliest, most hospitable people. And besides all of that, because that's all great, but justifying quality, they are just people. They're people we worked with. They have a claim, and we abandoned them. That is pretty much the feeling.
Thank you, Kerstin. Brishkay, you wanted to add something to that?
Yeah, I guess firstly, I just wanted to say that, well, Kerstin and I know each other because we met each other in 2012 in Kabul. So we know each other, and I respect Kerstin a lot. I respect you a lot. But I have to say that, making this important statement that you just shared here, that said that if Afghan women were able to participate, they would not have made a difference. I think that's inaccurate, because you don't know the potential of someone. You don't know what power they have unless you give them an opportunity, you give them the right information. Hearing you tell me on this panel here that there was just no opportunity for Afghan women and Afghans in general is infuriating. And I just wish that somebody had been that clear at the start of the peace talks, because I guarantee you that Afghans would have used that as fuel, right? So it almost feels like when you're telling me that our president and our government was not able to participate, and therefore Afghan women were not able to participate, I see that as a strategic move. Let's just make sure that the government is also not involved. In that way, nobody can say, why are women not involved? So I get the game now. I understand how it was played, but it is just like I'm shaking to my core right now. I just wish that somebody had said that frankly, because I guarantee you then Afghan women would have stood up. The thing is that we were fed little crumbs, right? We were manipulated by having, oh, these select, oh, this politician, this one or this four will represent you. It's infuriating to see the international community now speak so frankly about it. But I still firmly believe that if Afghan women were allowed to talk, we are not the same Afghan women. I think Nazanin, you can stand for this too. We are not the same Afghan women that were the Afghan women in the 1990s, who were disconnected from the world because we did not have digital technology, and we were not connected with the global. We were not united. In the past 10 years, Afghan women have formed activist groups. They have united. They are not the same women. We are not our mothers. I can assure you of that. But cruel game. It was a cruel game. And before I continue, I just want Nazanin to say, what do you think, Nazanin?
Yeah, you're right. We are not our mothers. And also we hope from international society that the force on Taliban for keeping of women rights and human rights. And after this female journalist, for the first time, 4 Afghan girls have demonstrated against the presidential place, and they called Taliban for keeping the social presence and political participation. But we can't keep this way, I think. We can keep this way and stand for our rights. But if international society also support us and force on Taliban, we hope.
We have a question here asking
basically, can I say that one thing, because I think you misunderstood me. I am not saying that Afghan women cannot do that. I am saying that there was no way to have them on the talks. I mean, you have a US president now who basically said, okay, the whole mission, we started the mission with the idea of nation building, with the idea of state building, whatever I think about that. But the idea was bring human rights, bring gender equality, make a better life, especially for Afghan women. And now you have a US president who stand and say, no, it was always just about making sure that Afghanistan is not a safe haven for terrorists attacking the US. That is now the narrative what President Biden is basically giving there. And I find that a terrible idea. And I was seriously shocked when he said that, because it literally kind of brings us back to a Westphalian world where we basically say, you know what, you can do in your country whatever you want. Screw human rights, screw women, do whatever you want as long as you don't attack us. Fine, all good. That's basically kind of what he is doing there. So I am not saying that Afghan women cannot do. I would never mess with an Afghan woman, honestly. I've been too long in that country to actually do that. They could. They just could never make it to the talks. And that was an international politics kind of thing. That was a US thing. That's what I meant.
Brishkay, you need to unmute yourself.
Sorry, it wasn't working. Now I did. Kerstin, you and I know each other so well that we are so frank with one another, and you know, I respect that in our relationship. That's you know how we are. So thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, you know, that's a lot to digest, you know, in that sense. Yeah, it would have been a different outcome if someone, like I said, had spoken that frankly. Yeah. And anyway, you said there was a question, Tal?
Yeah, so you kind of mentioned, or I mentioned, that there were no women in the Afghan, or mostly in the US Taliban talks, that the Afghan had representation in them. And I commented that the US were okay accepting these terms by the Taliban, but maybe you can clarify exactly how many women participated and in what terms was that done, if at all.
Right, I don't have all the details about that. There was 4 women that were sort of participated, and Kerstin actually would know more about that, but I don't think there was more than 4. In the last round of the talks, was there more than the usual 4 that was there? It was the same. There, and I think most of them were parliament members and politicians, right, Kerstin, from Fuzia Kufi and all of them? Yeah, but it seems like obviously there was no, you know, yeah. So, you know, in my film, for instance, you will see these women talk and explain their participation in some ways. But legitimately, we saw them on Afghan media, and you know, Nazanin can vouch for this too. They did criticize what was happening. and they did try and voice their opinions, but it seemed more like it was for a display, like a show, you know. That's what it seemed like to me. Nazanin, what did you think about the women who participated in the peace talks? Fawzia Kufi, wa ina ke rafta budan? Shmachi fikr mein kani? Do you think that?
I think they all are was like a symbol, you know. They didn't do anything. They didn't for Afghan women. Maybe, as you say, it all was like a game. I don't know more.
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, it's interesting if you think about it. If you, I mean, the fact of the matter is that we cannot just say it was the U.S. because towards the peace talks, Germany participated during it. There was other nations inside of it. It certainly wasn't just the U.S. For instance, there was a lot of opportunity for a lot of nations to say, "Hey, this table is not balanced here. Something is out of whack," right? And I'm sure all those countries would love for us to continue pointing at the United States, because that's fantastic, right? You can, that's the boogeyman on that end. That's, you know, that's fine. But there's you know, accountability on more than just the US for in relation to the peace talks, for sure. We need to sort of dig into that a little bit, especially after, you know, hearing some insight from Kerstin. But I think what's also important is to understand is who was represented, and you know, to have a legitimate dialogue. For instance, it's best always to bring the most critical person to the table, the one that's going to challenge the other side the most, right? Not the one that's most likely going to be at peace, right? And that's not really balance. So we have, for instance, you know, Mahbubul Siraj. We've got lots of activists inside Afghanistan, you know, who were also politicians. They were not permitted to participate. Many women asked to be on that group to go to the peace talks in Doha, and I'm sure Kerstin knows it and Nazanin knows it. I've interviewed and talked to lots of prominent activists who are critical of the United States, who are critical of the NATO mission. They were not selected. That's for sure. But those are the ones that would have benefited us, right, Nazanin? The women who are critical of the United States, who have a history criticizing occupation, invasion, they were not brought into the talks. Yeah. Nazanin, do you have anything else? Or Kerstin, maybe?
Can I talk? I can talk. I mean, I can talk and you can hear me, which is a step further. Yeah, no, they weren't selected, and I really don't think that they would have been selected, because the idea of these, the idea of such diplomacy kind of things is basically not to have really an exchange of ideas. The idea is to present a united front and a result. So you're talking to the people who are going to support the result you want. And in the case, I mean, no one ever has accused me of being a United States lover or being uncritical towards my own country. The lead nation in that mission were always the United States. NATO kind of tagged along. It was always a United States kind of thing, and the United States at this point wanted out. That started under then President Trump, and that went on under now President Biden. And yeah, I absolutely agree that if it would have been on even footing, and if we would have included more diverse people, it would probably have, well, it would for sure have taken longer, which would also not be a bad outcome. Would have been a bad outcome, and it would look differently today. But yeah, but it wasn't. It definitely wasn't. And I mean, there were protests in Kabul even in 2018. I do remember before I left, there were those huge demonstrations of people coming together at least it started, and while I was still there, not so much in Kabul, but in the process, marching towards Kabul to demand a place on the table, to protest against the at this point again increasing attacks of the Taliban against innocent normal civilian people. So that was there. It just did not had any effect on what was happening in Doha at this point. Yeah, it just did not. I actually kind of wonder if there are questions from the audience. I don't want to take that over, but I wonder if people have questions, because at the moment we're talking with each other, and often it's also important to hear what people want to know.
Well, our admin and one of the questions that we already talked about as well, Jonathan Cohen wants to ask about how you see things progress from here. What can we do? What is done? What is the foreseen future?
Maybe Nazanin can take this first.
Nazanin, I think she froze. Oh, no, she's here.
I'm here. One thing I forgot to say, now Taliban took all Afghanistan but Panjshir province. And in Panjshir province, the son of Ahmed Shah Massoud has announced resistance against Taliban. And some people which are against Taliban go to Panjshir and want to fight against Taliban. This is the one issue coming Taliban, the other issue, and no opportunity for work and no way for export and import for business. This is other issue. If in this hard situation, international society leave us alone, I think Afghanistan will be changed in a fighting ground again. I think we will go again toward civil wars.
I think I agree with Nazanin that one of the outcomes possibly could be a civil war if you have the son of the former Northern Alliance leader, including ISIS Khorasan, who's also already in Afghanistan. So, there's no doubt about that already. It's not like they've just arrived in Kabul. So civil war is very, very, very likely. The other, the way I see it the terrible circumstance is it would be civil war, or what might be accepted by the international community as okay, and possibly the Taliban could rebrand themselves as this being okay, and it will not be okay for Afghan women and girls, would be forming probably in the near future a country like Iran or Saudi Arabia, where that's where our rights would kind of stay. And it might be a surprise to your audience here, the fact that Afghan women have had more freedoms in the city, and in terms of Kabul, in what we can do and what we can demonstrate, how we can show ourselves, than those two countries. So to understand that our best outcome might be someone else's worst is unacceptable for me. Or it might be civil war. So it's one of those things. But again, I'm not an expert. I don't know about that part of it. But just to quickly respond as well to one question up here that says, how much responsibility for the situation do you think lies with the US? So I'll just answer that because it's really important. 20 years ago, we heard Laura Bush, and I think it was in November 2001, I think, when she did her radio address. It was the first time a first lady gave a radio address, I think, in that speech. And she said in her long speech how important and necessary it is for the US military to go inside Afghanistan, because women and girls need to be saved from terrorists. I'm summarizing it in my own ESL language terminology, not in her language, but that's the gist of it, and anyone can listen to it. It was specific. It was women and girls need to be saved from the terrorists, the Taliban. So that was the United States promise. That's what tugged at the hearts of mothers and fathers who sent their sons and daughters from about 38 countries. I might be wrong in the number of the countries in NATO, but roughly that tugged at the heart and was that emotional little pull to send your soldiers out there to die for Afghanistan, save women and girls. That was the promise. Today, we have seen 20 years later, a different outcome. Now, in all honesty, the first 10 years was really good, up to about 12 years. And Kerstin can also account for that. There was a lot of good in the beginning. Absolutely. Freedoms were brought. It was a quick transition from hell to a livable, like to a good society in some ways. It was. And then after 2012 and 13, things started to deteriorate. And we can blame the United States, but we can also blame our own government. The Afghan government is incredibly corrupt. We are well aware of that. We can also blame the Bonn Conference that stated a lot of power to the Northern Alliance warlords who were brought in and given parliamentary and political positions. The Northern Alliance has not been a friend to all Afghans, particularly not to Afghan women either. So we saw there's a lot of wrongs that have happened in the past in relation to their Taliban talk. Yes, we can point more fingers at the US, but the corrupt Afghan government, the US's failed promise itself has all played a role in deteriorating in our country. Kerstin, I'll give it over to you now.
Yeah, there is so much, I think. So first, I do think civil war is highly likely. I am not saying that lightly, and God, do I wish that I'm wrong with that prediction, but I do think that it is likely to come. I mean, we already have remains of the Northern Alliance again in the Panjshir Valley, so it's probably going to come. What I also kind of think, and what I find also very terrible and terrifying, is the price of food have already been skyrocketing, at least in Kabul. At the moment, most of my information come from Kabul, because everyone I know who is from different provinces normally fled to Kabul, and they're in hiding in Kabul right now at the moment. So as Nazanin said, the banks shut down, the Hawala system shut down. So there was also no possibility for people who are in hiding going to get money somewhere at the moment. One of my biggest problems, honestly, is how I have one more family, at least one more family, very high up on my personal list. And at the moment, my biggest concern is how do I get money in that country to actually enable them to not starve in the next week or something like that. And I do think that there is also, that we're also looking at a very strong possibility of famine coming. The Afghan winter is terrible. It's really, this is a country which is incredibly hot in summer and it's really cold in winter. And so that will be a problem which is coming very, very soon, that we are looking at people starving and freezing to death. That is also what I kind of think. In terms of how is that going to go on politically, I am very wary of making a prediction. I'm an IR scholar, and I do think that IR scholars are incredibly bad at predicting outcomes. So it's probably something we should not do often. At the moment, there is this general idea of the international community to basically engage with the Taliban, negotiate with the Taliban, very much with the idea of getting the people out. We haven't gotten out in the last 2 weeks. As much as I am for getting the people out, negotiating now with the Taliban is setting a precedent for actually accepting them as a government. So, and that is, of course, I think also what they are playing at, why they are doing that in the first place. So generally, my ideas for the country are really bleak. And I find the situation as it is at the moment that we basically kind of say, yeah, the whole idea, I mean, basically we can say the whole development after World War II was about global norms, global order, what is allowable, permittable, what is not. The whole idea of R2P, of the responsibility to protect doctrine, is that under conditions of atrocities, here under conditions of genocide, as international community, we cannot stand by, we have the duty to intervene, and in that way, atrocities / genocide annul state sovereignty. That was the idea of this incredibly important norm which we developed. And now we're standing there and saying, dear Taliban, do whatever you want, as you don't attack us, we are fine with that. That's literally taking a step away from that idea that we do have a responsibility, and you cannot do as you please in a country you overrun and you took the government over. So that is something which I find in general a very problematic and terrible idea. For the question, which I find incredibly important, Galia's question, if there is responsibility for the US and the 8 other nations who actually engaged from 2002 on in first in ISAF and then in resolute support. And I very much agree with Brishkay, and I thank you very much for saying that, because I am normally the only person, I feel, who says that in the first 10 years, so up to 2011, a lot of good stuff happened. Schools were built, people were helped, girls could go to school, universities opened, a lot of really good stuff happened. I spent considerable amount of time, not in Kabul, but in Kunduz, which really is a province. It's, I mean, if they hear me saying that it's a province and it's a tiny city, they are probably kind of annoyed with me, because of course they think it's a big city, but it's nowhere near as big as Herat and Kabul and Mazar-i Sharif. It's really a province, and a lot of things happened. I do think that first, even then, the Taliban made attempts to sneak back in. When 2007, 2008, the until then really good security situation in Kunduz specifically started to deteriorate, and the first attacks, and we had the first suicide attacks. So we could see that even then. But I think the real problem, the real big thing kind of happened when President Obama decided to close ISAF, to hand over the responsibility for security to the Afghan security forces, which was basically the first step towards the withdrawal. They decided then to do resolute support, but resolute support was a training mission. It was really just about training the ANA. Training the Afghan National Army, and to an extent training the Afghan National Police, but it was not anymore about really supporting the government. It was not anymore a combat mission in that instance. It was a different kind of thing, and I think that showed very prominently that they could sit us out in a way, that the Taliban could basically really just say, okay, there is that saying of, you have the clocks, but we have the time. So wait, we sit you out. We come back in here. We do that slowly, but in the end, we will win. And in that way, I do think there is responsibility from starters on, because what we did not do, well, first we supported a really corrupt government. It's no accident that Hamid Karzai was the president, and then Ashraf Ghani was the president. They were actively supported by the West, by NATO, by the Western governments, and that was probably not the wisest decision. But I think in essence, and then I stop. I think in essence, Galia, the question is really, can we transfer a political idea, like the idea of democracy, can we take that and transfer it into a country with a very different history, a very different upbringing? Or do we have to look more into what do the people there want? Bring the women, but also the men, the people. There are people in the country. There's a history there. That's not a blank slate. And we cannot just take this idea and say, okay, look, here's democracy, just go in that direction because it worked so well for us. Yes, it did, but obviously it didn't work in the way it was done so well for Afghanistan. So, and I think we see that in a lot of former state building missions, that there is there is a idea to put a system top down into a place which is just different, with listening to what should really be done there. What do the people want? What would they support? That, and in that case, I do think there is responsibility, and there is responsibility from starters on.
Thank you. We have one more question. And maybe we can start with Nazanin. The question is by Noy Shalev, and she says, do you believe that women activists will be able to continue their important mission in Afghanistan in any sort of way?
No.
That was short.
Yeah, it's short. No, because Taliban day by day limit the activity of women, and we hope that international community don't accept the government of Taliban until they make a specific law for women, which in that law be full freedom for women, for working of women, getting education, and be freedom, women be free in every section of their lives. And can I say in Persian, Brishkay Jan?
Oh yeah, ما ترجمة برات میکنم، مشکل نیست.
گفتن که چقدر زنا میتونه، آیا زنا میتونه در این وضعیت فعالیت‌های خود انجام بده یا نه؟ فکر کنم قسم یک چیزی گفتم.
بله.
فکر نمیکنم که زنا بتونه در این وضعیت فعالیت‌های خود ادامه بده، به خاطر از اینکه طالبان هر روز فعالیت‌های زنا را محدود میکنه. حتی وقتی یک زن when a woman Taliban whipping a woman.
نازنین ایره ترجمه میکنم، باز شما انگلیسی بگوینک.
Okay.
خب Nazanin said that she doesn't believe that women activists will be able to be involved in their activism because she sees the women's rights in Afghanistan diminishing slowly. She sees it diminishing. And then she went to say something in English. بفرمایید نازنین جان.
وقتی که when a woman Taliban whipping a woman just because of her coverage, so how we can continue our activities under the power of the Taliban? It's impossible.
Mm-hmm. I think Nazanin is right about in the statement about, like, we might not see Taliban whipping them, as much as we did in 1996, for instance. But the fact of the matter is that we're dealing with a volatile, unpredictable group. They are fundamentalists in their ideology. They use phrases like Sharia law. So they have core beliefs that is anti-women's freedom. That's just the fact.
Yeah.
Right, Nazanin?
Yeah, day by day, Afghan women lose their spirit, their positive spirit. They cannot move on. I talked about the female journalists when after fall of Kabul that they return to their duty, but now you hardly can find a female journalist on screen of TV in Afghanistan, because as I heard from social media, Taliban treat the female journalists because of continuing of their duty. So by this kind of situation, how we can continue our at least we cannot continue our activity because of saving of our family, you know. Here is not only one threat for our life,
Yeah, I think continuing on to what Nazarene has to say, because she's she is connected to women's activists on the ground, and she knows that the question I'm curious to find out, is it women activists? Do you mean Afghan women activists or NGOs that have international community of women's activists? Who is this question is referring to, both or one or the other? Because they will have different experiences. So I'm not sure if we'll get a response, but I'll speak for both, I suppose.
I think that question went to you, right, Brishkay? The question of which kind of activists?
Yeah. I'm just curious because there'll be a different experience. So women's activists who are
I was not the one asking the question. It was Noi Shalev who asked the question, and as far as I understand, she's talking about Afghan women on ground in Afghanistan, and not philanthropic work done far.
Okay, because those are very different experiences. That's all. Yeah. In terms of Afghan women's activists, this is just my personal view, and like I said, I'm not an expert. I'm just a filmmaker. If the Taliban are accepted as a legitimate government, which seems likely, it doesn't seem impossible by the international community from the language that's being used about them and how they're being referred to, it's very likely. If that happens, I expect some women's activists inside Afghanistan will still be able to speak up, because the Taliban will not care as much, because they will have the legitimacy and the funding that they need anyway. So it's not really going to disrupt their agenda. And just like in other countries, like I was saying in Saudi Arabia or Iran, and so every now and then one woman will be made an example of and punished, right? Just so that others can slowly not do that. Outside of Kabul, we will see very little activism from women. And like I said, because life outside of Kabul is very different. It's a different experience. But that's what I expect. So, and at the same time, I also expect that certain women who will speak up and show their activism. So I don't see that women will give up. We have lots of strong women who are very vocal on the ground there. Some of them will be made examples of so that others will not. That's just the way a group like Taliban, who believes in these fundamentalist ideas, sort of functions. But yeah, that's Nazarene or Kerstin can share on.
I can maybe make this question a little bit more complex and say that oftentimes we see in situations like this that there are things that women can do, like have organizations that take care of women and families, or take care of domestic violence and things like that, and they still are able to do this kind of work under totalitarian and patriarchal regimes, while other kind of work is more complex, I think.
I think that, again, Nazreen will answer. I think that kind of work will be possible. I mean, just this morning, I don't know if anybody's been following the news, but the new spokesperson for the Taliban, I think, had a meeting with some female representatives to hear about their, I guess, views and suggestions. So I expect, those kinds of aid like organizations that provide that kind of support might be able to function. At the moment, I might be wrong. It seems that the Taliban is dependent on money, on funding, certain kind of funding that comes in from the West, and that might pressure them to honor some obligations in that sense through that. I could be wrong. It depends on what kind of an activist you are and what you want to say, right? So that's what I'm saying. The ones who are the most vocal and anti-Taliban fundamentalist ideologies will be made examples of, that's for sure. نازنین شما چی فکر میکنین؟
I basically said before that I would never mess with an Afghan woman. So, and I stand by that assessment. So, and in that instance, I kind of hope that at least some activism might be possible. I'd like to throw in another thing. For once, yeah, they are almost certainly dependent on outside funding, and that might pressure the Taliban into honoring and allowing some stuff they haven't allowed in the 80s or in the 90s. I think one of the problems what we're looking at is also that we are constantly talking about the Taliban, but they are not a homogeneous group. There are different groups we are looking at here. You have the more the a little less hardcore probably in Kabul, and those are the ones which kind of do the statements and who are talking with women journalists at the moment and who are talking to women activists. But I'm kind of saying that in areas like, I don't know, Nangarhar, Zabul, Uruzgan, those places, they have been hardcore and they have always been hardcore and they will be hardcore. I mean, it's one of those things again that Kabul was always, even in the last complicated times, a little bit of a safe haven. It's hard to say it like that, but when you went to see how life was like for women and people in general, let's Kabul in Uruzgan as an example. Life there was miserable. It was it all the time, and it hasn't really changed. Now it's maybe a little bit more miserable because, as I said, I do think that food is going to be scarce and famine is probably coming. But in terms of how people treat you, I don't think that this has really changed from 2002 to today. And that will probably, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I do think this will go on that way. So there might be some windows, some spaces where activism might be able to happen, but I expect that to be slim chances. And it would really be up to us as the international community to push for that. But again, at the moment, we are not really in the position for doing that because there are still people in the country who need to get on a evaluation list and who need to be brought out. And at the moment, the Taliban have a little more the leverage, I believe. So let's how that works out. But yeah, again, overall, I'm not terribly optimistic.
We are, I was just trying to figure out how can we extend the time. We passed our finishing time 10 minutes ago, and I wanted to ask each one of you to say a few sentences or just final thoughts about something that you think that you would like to share that is important for you to add or to restate. Something that would stay with all of us. We have the Facebook event, and I think that many of the questions that people had through the talk, maybe you can post them there, and maybe our speakers will be kind to engage with them over that over the next few days. But we do understand that many of you have other commitments, so maybe we can really finish up. So, final statements. Brishkay, you started. So
Nazanin? Okay, all right, sure. I just want to end with, just one statement that I would like, everyone in this panel to just like remember is there's going to be a lot of Afghans, with brain drain that's happening, Afghan women who have left the country, who are going to be landing in other countries or whatever, as journalists, as writers, as filmmakers, and give them opportunities in those fields. Because if they can continue speaking, even outside our country, that would be great. So especially female journalists who are coming out, support them, help them amplify their voice that way, so that they don't just arrive to a new country and have to restart life with a whole new identity. Let them support them so they can continue this work that they were doing in Afghanistan outside. Girls like Nazanin, for instance, who I pray to God gets out soon, but when she does, she still wants to be a journalist. And so let's do that. Let's give them those opportunities. And the other thing that I want you to remember is have faith in Afghan women, have faith in us, trust us. We know our country. We are well versed, and know that we are not our mothers. So I just simply want to end on that note, just to get that through. We are not our mothers.
Kerstin, we'll do it by the order of speaking, maybe.
As you wish.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Okay. So I don't really have a closing statement because the whole situation is still so ongoing, and I am so involved in trying to get those people out I still have there that I really don't have a closing word. But I would like for a moment to use my end statement to actually look at the question, and I am incredibly sorry. I am sure I pronounced that name wrong. I really apologize. There is a question of Yesu Kim about where the power of the Taliban is coming from, through violence or public consent. I'd say a bit but beyond that, it's what we actually kind of know by now is that for years, literally for years, the Taliban had a really good information campaign where they basically kind of really bullied everyone with kind of sending messages via social media, via WhatsApp with, we know what you do, come get you. And when you get something, the effects of bullying and threatening people, especially in the info space, so in social media, they are well known, and it is intimidating and it is terrible. And even if you live in a state where you basically kind of say, okay, I have a police I trust and a government I trust, and I can go there and I can say someone is threatening me, do something, even then the effects are devastating. So, and the Afghans don't have that kind of state. And the kind of police to trust. So for really years, the Taliban were sneaking in and making threats, and that is part of the reason I believe where that power of domination is coming from. Can you suggest ways we can help from Denise Joseph? Well, Brishkay already said a little bit, and I don't know in which country you are, but if you are in a country which was involved in the mission, so if you were in the US or in one of the NATO countries, there is, at the moment, we still severely have the problem of getting people out. People who are eligible, people who are on lists, people who have SIVs, people who do have the claim, and we cannot get them out at the moment because no one goes to the airport, hardly a plane lands at the airport, the borders are closed. Germany is very much negotiating with the neighboring countries to open their borders to allow Afghans who have a visa actually come over the border, and even that is complicated. So I basically kind of say at this point, a lot is really about lobbying and pressuring governments and tell them, we do not forget that, and we want you to stand by the responsibility you took on, we took on when we did this mission, when we worked with those people, and when we promised a better life. That's pretty much kind of what I think is at the moment the important thing.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Nazanin, closing thoughts.
Should I say my last speech? Can you hear me?
Yes.
as my last speech, I want to say that today we are the worst headline around the world, and this is the worst field that we can have. So I hope that international communities force on Taliban by making a proper law which women and every section of society have their own have their rights. And you know, because we cannot all especially Afghan women cannot live under the law which is designed in a different society hundreds years ago. You know what I mean? So we hope that international community force on them to make a proper law that at least people be little free under that law, and also force on the Taliban that they let those Afghan who want to leave Afghanistan, and I hope that international community don't leave us alone. That's it.
Okay. I want to thank you all very much for making time to listen to us and engage in conversation. And I want to thank so very much to Kerstin and Brishkay and to Nazanin for taking the time of sharing all of these really, really important thoughts and knowledge with us. And I hope that this is just the beginning of the conversation and that we will be able to continue making these spaces. Just keep on following on our posting on this and ask questions, and we will try to make these voices heard as much as we can. And good night.